Welcome to the Pickup Korea podcast, and today I want to discuss a little bit about how the age and the profession of the girls that you meet when you're out and about on the street or at a bar, how those two things affect the interaction and the date and the dynamic overall. Okay, so the first one I really want to discuss is age, because that's a common question I get. Korea is a society that it's one of those things that when you first meet a Korean person, oftentimes they'll ask you your age relatively early in an interaction because in Korea, the way you talk to somebody it really changes depending on your age, right? So they have like polite language, 존댓말, and they have like 반말, which is informal, casual language. And there are different sort of terms. You have like oppa or nuna, these kind of terms, right? Dongseng, different terms that specify the person's age or the person's position in relation to you, right? And so one thing that I often get asked is like, how does a girl's age and your personal age affect things here, right? And so first of all, I want to mention that when I first came here, the younger girls were a lot more closed off. They were a lot more naive, shy, things along those lines, right? But as time went on, if you look at now or even the past few years, I've noticed that the younger generation, I'm talking about, from anywhere from like 20 to 25, 24, the younger generation are a lot more open, a lot more adventurous, a lot more globalized, right? A lot more up for adventure. And so oftentimes it's those girls, the younger ones, are actually oftentimes more receptive or more curious, more interested in meeting, more down to have fun, right? And as I mentioned, they're more globalized. So they grew up in a generation where, having a smartphone is normal, connected to the internet. They've probably traveled to different countries. They probably maybe even studied English. Some of them have studied English abroad or just, here in Korea. And so you get much more of they're fully Korean, but they're less conservative would be the right way to look at it, right? They're more open, more liberal, more open-minded, right? More risk takers, I guess you would say, compared to girls who are above perhaps 27 years of age, perhaps. So once you get to about 27, 28, 29, then you're looking at really a whole different generation. So once you get about, let's say, 29, right? Which means that when they were in their teenage years, it's like right around when smartphones just came out, right? And so they're a little bit less globalized, a little bit less open-minded, a little bit more old school Korean values the older you get, right? So I really find it cuts off around, maybe like 28, 29-ish. Once you get to about 30 and above, that's when it's really like a whole different generational mindset, right? And so that's when you have a lot more conservative girls. They have a little bit more of a shield sometimes. And not only that, sometimes they might be a little bit more open-minded or adventurous. However, a lot of the girls at that age group have a difference in thinking, or they have some kind of hang-ups, right? So a girl who's in Korea who's like 20 to 25, as I mentioned, perhaps a lot more open for adventure, a lot more fresh in perspective, right? Fresh in more ways than one. But the older they get, oftentimes they'll have some kind of hang-up, right? So perhaps they, not only do they think in a more traditional conservative way, but on top of that, they might have a hang-up, like they met a foreigner once and they had a bad experience, or they never met a foreigner, but they have these sort of weird old ideas, like old outdated ideas about how foreigners are, right? Or just in general with dating any kind of guy, they had a range of good experiences, bad experiences, and they have sort of hang-ups around dating, hang-ups around interacting with you, hang-ups around relationships and things like that, right? So they might have different expectations, they might have different rules to themselves now or something like that, or different traumatic experiences. So it's really once you get to around that 29-30 age bracket that these sort of like more hang-ups come up, and more of a conservative thinking, weird stereotypes around foreigners and dating often come up. So I would say really that's what really affects the interaction is, in terms of age, is really how they see themselves in dating and their experiences and their hang-ups, and then also that generational mindset that's from the younger generation where they're open-minded to the older generation where they're a little bit more conservative, right? And more old school, so to speak, right? And then on top of that, you have girls that are like older, right? Maybe 35 or even older. And that even goes like another generation back, right? And so even oftentimes they're even way more old school, right? And keep in mind that these are really generalizations. So what I'm saying here is like, it applies to a lot of the people in these age demographics, but not everyone, right? Like, so you can easily meet a girl who's 29, 30, who's adventurous, who's open-minded, right? Who's fresh and fresh in perspective, right? And then you can easily meet a girl who's like 22, who's a little bit more traditional and conservative and what have you, right? So these are not, black and white, but there is a fair degree of, what would you say? Just generally speaking, it's a trend in those directions, right? And then when you get to around, like I said, 30 to 35 age bracket or more, oftentimes the girls are looking for marriage, or they're really like, they're more in that serious mindset of like a marriage partner. In Korea, kind of when you're around like 30 to 35, it's like time to get married. So they often have pressure from their family, pressure from their friends, society, job to tie the knot, to meet a guy who's, they can settle down with, and things along those lines. So that's when you'll get, girls who are often very, very serious minded, or they're kind of, you won't really have much time to like date and have fun because they might be in a different mindset, right? However, that being said, of course, there are girls these days too that I've noticed that are in that age bracket, 30 to 35, that really don't even want to get married. They just want to enjoy their life. They perhaps they have a lot of friends or a career that they enjoy. Maybe they opened a coffee shop, a yoga studio, they have their own clothing shop, or they're dedicated to career advancement, or they just have other values other than marriage, right? They just want to travel and have fun, and would like dating guys or having a boyfriend, but they're not as locked into the traditional societal roles and societal expectations of behaving a certain way or doing certain things at a certain age, right? And so when I say these things, that being said, don't let a girl who's 20 to 25, don't see them all in this way, but it is good to recognize patterns, right? Like 30 to 35 could, when they start behaving a certain way, having this sort of knowledge of how society works here, how the younger ones are more open, how the slightly older ones are a little bit more conservative, a little bit more hang-ups, and the slightly older ones are more marriage focused. It might be like 70% like that, or 75% like that. So you can use that as sort of a general guide, but like I said, don't let it be self-limiting. Say that you meet a girl who you're really attracted to, who's 30 or something like that. They might not all necessarily be like that, right? And so different people have different backgrounds, different values, different experiences. So ultimately you want to take them, each person as a fresh experience, fresh perspective. However, when you start seeing certain behavioral patterns, you can kind of somewhat predict what their mindset is, or their the way they're thinking, their mindset, and their behavioral patterns, right? And so that's just a general guide on a few of the age demographics and how you might see them act and respond to you and interact with you. But like I said, there are the older ones who are just not interested in marriage. There are the more middle-aged ones who are also not, are still adventurous. And then there are the younger ones who could still be conservative at times. So what you really just have to do is go out there and really just meet all kinds of girls, all kinds of ages, and gather your own experience, and let these words here be sort of a provide a little bit of guidance on what you can and might see when interacting with girls of these different ages, right? And so a lot of guys have different preferences. A lot of guys want to meet girls who are really young, 20, 21. Other guys prefer girls who are a little bit more mature, have a little bit more life experience, have, you know, money, a job, maybe in their like later 20s. And so that being said, you can kind of know what to expect when you're approaching and dating girls at these different age demographics, right? And so also on the other hand, we have not only the girl, right, but also you yourself. So it really, really, really depends on the age of the girl and her own unique view and perspective, and also your age, right? And so, for example, say you are 25 years old and you're approaching girls who are 20, 21, 22, there's not much of a thing there. Like, you're a couple years older or maybe even the same age, and it's really more or less comfortable for them to meet with somebody like you. Typically speaking, a lot of girls definitely are attracted to guys who are older than them by, you know, a few years or whatever, but it's the OPA phenomenon, right? So they want to a lot of them want to be with a guy who's a little older, a little more experience, a little more maturity, who can lead them. However, that being said, it doesn't mean that if you're younger than the girl, then it's all off, right? Like, it's you can't meet them. By no means is that the case. By no means is that the case. However, if you're roughly close to the girl's age, slightly older, that's a pretty good place to be, and they're going to feel comfortable around you, right? They can feel you're relatable. You know, they're used to interacting with people around your age, perhaps in their school or part-time job or what have you. And so it's a good place to be. If you're maybe 30 to 30, 31, 32, approaching the same girls, then what often come up is they might ask you relatively early, like, how old you are, because they notice you look a little bit older than their typical social circle. However, by no means are you off limits at that age, right? Like, by no means are you, there will be some girls who don't want to meet guys that are 10 years older or 8 years older. Definitely there will be some, but the majority will be open to it, I would say, overall, right? And then say that you're 40 to 50 now, right, in your 40s or 50s, then that's when it gets more tricky, I would say, in Korea. That's when, you know, definitely the age question will come up a lot more, and that's when there will be a lot of girls who will just screen you out based on age, right? And here's one thing: you don't ever really need to tell them your age. I would really, if you're a bit older, I would advise really to kind of skirt around the subject. Just make it more of an emotional experience. Share your personality, share your vibe, your range of emotions, your expression, your leadership. Connect with them on deeper levels, and let the experience speak for itself. Don't get caught up in age and these sort of logical topics, right? And so oftentimes, if they feel good with you, comfortable with you, attracted to you despite your age, you know, maybe later on they find out your age, or, you know, the topic doesn't come up until later once you guys start dating, or you just you're selectively vague, so to speak, perhaps, right, as to not screen yourself out, right? But on the other hand, there are, of course, girls who are just into older dudes. So that's a whole new demographic that you'll be open to, right? So say you meet like a 25-year-old or something, 24-year-old, 26-year-old, and, you know, when you're in your 20s, she wouldn't have been attracted to you, but now she's just into that older, mature type. And so there are definitely a lot of girls, or at least a fair amount of girls, who are just attracted to the, you know, older guys, right? There's definitely a fair amount. So you never really need to worry about, like, am I too old or anything like that. However, the age issue will come up more. And on top of that, there will be girls just who, you know, screen you out, and there will be some amount of girls who are actually just interested in older guys, right? So you never really want to let that become an excuse to not taking action, right? And so in terms of my personal journey myself, you know, starting out pretty young here, really the age stuff came up less when I was younger, except for maybe girls that were older than me. And then after that, as you know, growing older, being in my 30s, oftentimes when I'm approaching the younger girls, they will, you know, they'll bring up that topic very early, right? It'll come up, you know, not all the time, but way, way more often than before, right? And so when it comes up, I prefer to be more vague about it, you know, and not really ruminate on it, because I'm more interested in connecting on experiences and not to, you know, say my age and my bank account or anything like that. I would rather her decide whether she wants to meet me based on, or hang out right now, you know, go to grab a drink or a coffee, based on how she feels with me rather than the age. So that's my approach. Other guys, they will be upfront and just say they're 45 or whatever their age is, right? And that will certainly screen out more girls, right? And so it's another approach you can take, but just keep that in mind. And so as far as if you're also in your 30s or 40s and you're meeting girls that are in their 30s, then now that's a whole nother demographic that they'll be even more comfortable, because you're more in their age bracket, right? You're more seen as relatable, right? So you have, you know, girls in their 30s who, you say you're 35, 40, there's really not much issue there, right? Okay, so another thing I wanted to mention on how or what affects interactions is the job or profession, or if she's a student or what have you. So Korea, I've written about this extensively in the Pick Up Korea ebook, which you should definitely grab. It's an amazing resource. I wrote it over the course of a year, and with over 10 years of experience dating in Korea, learning the language, the culture, meeting girls of all different ages, backgrounds, jobs, looks, you know, everything from models to K-pop trainees to normal company workers to jobless, unemployed, to students, to hostesses, escorts, you know, really the whole shebang, right? Everything you can think of. So that book includes a whole chapter on these different personality types or job types, and has a lot of information there. So you should definitely check it out at pickupkorea.com ebook. So as far as the different professions themselves, they definitely have an impact. So for example, if you meet a girl who is a Pilates teacher, yoga teacher, trainer, fitness trainer, I'm personally really, really attracted to those girls. It happens to be every week that I approach girls, I'll meet a Pilates teacher, a yoga teacher, a personal trainer, because they're just extremely attractive, extremely in shape. You know, they're often wearing the sexy yoga gear or like just sexy training looking clothes. And yeah, they're healthy. And one thing about it is they have more passion for life, more zest for life, because they're not locked away in the office all day. They're not bogged down by the company, by the 팀장님, the team manager, and the overtime and company expectations. They're not jaded to jaded to life, right? And rather they're doing, you know, they're exercising, they're healthy, they're sexy, they're in shape. They like what they do. They work out for a living. They enjoy their life, and they often work, not all of them, but a lot of them are like freelance, or they work almost more part-time, like, you know, something like, for example, she might have yoga class at this gym from 10 to 12, and then a break for a few hours, and she might go over to another area and work 3 hours at a Pilates academy, right? And so they don't have as much of a, generally speaking, some might work crazy long hours too at one studio or gym. However, generally speaking, they have more of a chill, spaced out schedule, right? And so that really affects their mindset. That really affects their attitude and their personality, right? And so meeting a girl like this, not only they're attractive, but more zest for life, less stress, better shape, right? And I really find that these types can be really, really good girlfriends or girls that you date on a regular basis, right? You also have one of my favorites are nurses, because they are not only really attractive, there just happen to be a lot of very attractive nurses as well, but they're very caring, they're very sweet. A Korean friend once told me, like, the really three nice girls that are attractive to date, three types were nurses, girls that work at department store, right? Like makeup section, and kindergarten school teachers. So they all have to be sort of bright in their personality, caring, for the children, for the patients, for the customers, and they all typically go to, oftentimes, typically go to 2 years education. So they're less bogged down by studying all the time and more like fun-loving and caring and sweet people, right? And so I do find the nurses are really good, really caring. However, one tricky thing is they do oftentimes have this rotating schedule depending on what kind of hospital they work at. So they might work all night for a few days and then have a day off and then work super early in the morning. So one tricky thing is like getting that first date can be tricky because you have to match schedules with them. So that's one thing that will affect the interaction, is just sometimes it's hard to lock in a time due to their rotating schedule, right? And so that's one thing that'll majorly affect that interaction, right? And to go back to a couple of the other ones I mentioned, kindergarten teacher and department store worker typically finish at reasonable times. They finish like anywhere from like 5 to could be 8 p.m. typically, right? And so for them, it's much easier to schedule a date, much easier to meet up if they're interested, and if there's a good vibe there, right? And so those are a couple others that you might want to consider or, know what you can expect if you come across, right? Others are just teachers in general. So teachers in Korea, they can be working at a school, they can be working at an academy. And so they, if they work at a school, they often get off early as well, like a kindergarten teacher, like 5-ish. If they work at a academy, it's really tricky because in Korea, sometimes the academies go really late, right? So there's really a big difference in terms of scheduling dates with girls who work at schools versus who work at academies, right? Some other professions, a typical company worker, a typical office worker, she will, a big thing is depending on if it's a foreign company or a Korean company. So if it's a Korean company, it's tricky because sometimes they have overtime. They can't leave the office until the boss leaves first. They might have hwaeshik or company boozing, company dinners, projects, things like that. And so, scheduling a thing with them could be tricky, sometimes only on the weekends. Sometimes they have early day they can meet. If it's a foreign company worker, much, much easier because typically they're running on a more of an American or European style of working. So they finish earlier, like 5 p.m., 6 p.m. And it's really, really much easier to schedule a date with them. And so that's something definitely to keep in mind. And really with the company workers, I find that like the younger they are, the newer they are, the more it's kind of like the more they're like that yoga teacher where they have more of a passion and zest for life. And then really the more they stay in these like Korean companies, the older they get, a little bit more bogged down they get, a little bit more jaded they seem to be, right? And so keep that in mind. I do find the ones that work for foreign companies to be a little bit more have a little bit more satisfaction, a little bit better work-life balance, and oftentimes they get better pay too. So that's one thing that can affect the interaction too. Also, another big demographic is teachers, right? Or sorry, students. And so you have university students, academy students, and so with them, they're often the younger generation, right? So what I said earlier with how the younger generation acts applies here as well. With students, all kinds of different students. Some are just studying in academy, and if you're approaching around a major area like Hongdae or Gangnam or one of these hubs, you'll definitely come across a lot of students. And if they're at academy, oftentimes it can go late, it can be in the middle of the day. So it's really just a matter of just finding out their schedule and trying to pitch a day that works while they're not in class, right? With university, typically it's not that hard to get them on a date unless it is a like final season or midterm season where it's like they're really screwed on their time, right? They're really like cramming in for all these presentations and tests within like a 2-week period. So if you just happen to get their number during one of those periods, oftentimes the number's toast, it's garbage, no good. But sometimes you can meet them later after that, or if you happen to meet a student that's not in that crazy busy season, or if it's vacation period, much easier, right? Okay, so you have that factor. Other types you could have are the hostesses or night workers, right? So maybe they work at a room salon, maybe they work at a business bar, whiskey bar, maybe they work fully in the sex industry, like in an office or a massage room, right? So you have all these different kinds of super attractive girls that either entertain, pour drinks for guys, or even are doing sexual services, escorts, and things like this, right? And so with these types, really what you'll find is that you can approach them, you can meet them sometimes on their off day, right? Sometimes on their off day, out and about at a coffee shop, shopping in Garoskil, Gangnam, here and there. Or you'll meet them really before their work in the major areas like Yeoksam, Sunlung, Samsung, Shinonhyun, where they're just getting a coffee, they're going to exercise before work to the gym, which they often do, or Pilates, or they'll be going to one of the hair shops, getting ready, doing their hair and makeup before they go to the hostess bar. And so if you can catch them in before that and get their number, have a good interaction, then oftentimes you'll find that they'll message you late at night, like 2:33 a.m. when they finish, sometimes even call you. And it gets tricky because if you're living a normal life schedule, you'll miss the call and like, she would have met me for a drink or to meet up after work, but you're sleeping, right? But if you're on a more unorthodox schedule, it can be really good because you can meet these girls really late at night. So a lot of the hostesses I've closed have been middle of the night, early morning, or I just happened to catch them on a day off or something like that, right? And so those ones really, really are trickier to not only approach because generally they speak no English. You have to speak good Korean. You have to have a very strong frame too. They have a very strong shield typically, and they're super hot. And, they can kind of read bullshit a mile away. But if you can sort of either meet them really late at night after work or somehow manage to meet them on their day off, which oftentimes what they'll do is they'll sleep all fucking day, right? They'll get off work late, sometimes meet friends for drinks or whatever, sometimes go to nightclubs, sometimes go home and sleep all day, and then you'll message them, and then they'll message you the next day at like 4 p.m., good morning or something like that, right? And so those ones can be very, very tricky if you are on a normal schedule, right? So we have those types. Some other types maybe worth mentioning are the peksu, or the unemployed, right? So these ones are oftentimes, the majority of peksus I would say are, or unemployeds, are between jobs, right? Like they quit a job and they want to take a break for a month and travel, or take a couple months off and just rest and relax and do things that they wanted to do, right? And so these ones are pretty good because they have a lot more free time, and they're open. If they're single too, they're open to meet up, or if they have a boyfriend they're not into, they're open to meet up. And typically speaking, it is really easier to get them on a date, and typically speaking, it is easier to get them on like a same day date or same day pull, right? Even recently was just coaching a student a few days ago, and he pulled one from the street. She was very attractive. She was great body, very feminine, quit her job like a month ago or something like that, and ended up bouncing her for a glass of wine and some pizza or something like that, and then bringing her home. And then I think he's actually on a date with her now at the Han River. And so obviously, she has a lot of free time, right? She has a lot of free time. And so those ones can be very, very good logistically, right? And they're not as stressed out at the moment because they're in between jobs, right? And so there's the peksu that are like in between jobs, and then there's the peksu who have like rich parents who they kind of just fuck off, right? They're more of the like rich girl Peksu types, right? And so those ones are a little bit more luxurious. They might be in richer areas, hanging out, drinking $10 coffee, or going to a cocktail bar, $30 cocktails or whatever, right? So those ones can be a little trickier because they're more insulated among their sort of social class, social network, but definitely attainable as long as you you have a good approach, a good interaction together. Typically, they will meet up if the initial interaction was good. So they're not totally out of possibility. However, that being said, they are tougher than the typical Peksu, I would say, because they are sort of insulated in their social class a bit, right? And so the more you can find relatable to them, knowing the same kind of cafes they hang out at, the same kind of lounges, the same areas, Cheongdam, Apgujeong, these places, more relatability you definitely will have, the more comfortable she'll feel meeting up with you, right? And I think I covered a decent amount of jobs here. There certainly are a lot more actually that I cover in the ebook. So if you really want to go into depth on this, you can read the ebook. It has a lot more information. But yeah, I just wanted to give a little overview of the age demographics of girls, how that affects the interaction, and on top of that, how the profession affects things, right? And one last thing I was going to mention, flight attendants, right? And so flight attendants are really, really attractive in Korea. They only hire really like 7+, 7.5+, 8 oftentimes. And they're another really, really tricky one to meet up. However, if you are approaching and gaming around the airport areas, it's a gold mine. If you're approaching around Gimpo Airport or the few stations around there, they pretty much live like 1 to 2 stations from Gimpo Airport to Incheon Airport as well. And so if you happen to live in those areas, which I had friends that did, or I have gamed in those areas too, having a place around there, you can often catch them when they get off they just flew to Japan and back, or somewhere, and they came back and they're bored and they're open to meet. But if not, it can be really tricky because matching the times of them coming in and out of the country or domestically can be tricky. And if you're far away from their area, it's more of a hassle to meet up. So I would really say they are a gold mine for if you live in those areas near the airport, right? If not, don't be too discouraged if it's really hard to get a meetup. So it's one thing I was going to mention. But anyways, I think I gave some good general advice, good general information here that could be of value for a lot of people. And until next time.